Good afternoon. Welcome to today's Google Hangout with Fire Engineering, sponsored by Tincata Fabric. Today we have a little different show. Normally we have some fire service representatives from across the country in different locations, and we sit back, bounce ideas around the table, and hang out and talk about a topic. Unfortunately today things came up for a lot of our other guests, so we're here today in New Haven with Frank Ricci, Battalion Chief of New Haven Fire Department, and Assistant Chief, Acting Chief of the City of New Haven Fire Department. And we're going to talk command. Before we start talking about command, we just want to give a shout out to our sponsor. This show every month would not be possible without Tincata Fabrics. Tincata makes every fire department set of PPE gear great. It protects us and it helps us. Their fabrics go into each and every fire department turnout gear on the market, whether you're wearing Globe, Morning Pride, Lion, all the different turnout gear on the market. It has Tincata fabrics in it. So we need to be thankful and grateful for them, what they do to protect us out in the streets, but also for their sponsorship through Fire Engineering for this show. We'd also like to start out with mentioning our condolences to FDNY with the loss of Battalion Chief Fahey of Battalion 19, or Division 19, I'm sorry. The loss for him and his family and the entire FDNY family is extremely tragic, and our hearts and thoughts go out with them, the fire department family, as well as his young children, family, and his wife at home. So as always, we got Frank here. He's going to start up the show, introduce Chief Macarelli, and we're going to start talking command.
Besides FDNY, Wilmington, Delaware also has a tragic loss, and we have brothers and sisters still in the hospital. So our thoughts and prayers are with their family, and we're going to be learning more about these events as they go on. But the fact of the matter is, we are firefighters, and as firefighters, we're going to place ourselves in harm's way every day. In Wilmington, there was a report of somebody trapped. Those firefighters were out there doing what firefighters do. And, you know, you can do everything right on this job and still get jammed up. The chief in New York City, he was at the command post. He was out front. So it shows you how dangerous it is anywhere on the fire ground. So our thoughts and prayers are with their families. I'd like to introduce Chief Macarelli. He's been the interim chief in the city of New Haven, the chief of operations. And he's somebody who came in as director of training and started a long journey, because New Haven was probably one of the last urban fire departments to adopt incident command. And if you know anything about New England politics and fire departments, it's extremely difficult to move a New England fire department in a positive direction because there's so many different moving parts. And Chief Macarelli has come in and taken us from a very aggressive department with a great reputation. And when we went to fires before, the fires went out. You know, no fires in New Haven were still burning. They went out. Our members did a great job. However, when something went wrong on a fire ground, that's where we seemed to fall apart in that command structure. And what Chief Macarelli was able to do was to get everybody to buy into his vision, get the union to buy into his vision, the training division, the Board of Aldermen, the mayor's office, and what he accomplished was quite remarkable. It not only made the fire ground safer, made us more efficient and more effective. It also helped us achieve an ISO rating of 1, which New Haven is very proud to be a Class 1 department now. So, Chief, welcome to the show. And if you'd like to introduce yourself to the viewers, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Matt Macarelli. I'm the Operations Chief, Assistant Chief of Operations for the New Haven Fire Department, and currently serving as the Acting Chief, as Frank said, serving honorably. Yeah, a lot of what Frank said is true. It's all true. A lot of what we do in the fire service is timing and preparation. And I had been preparing based on a directive from our previous chief, Chief Grant, and his assistant, Chief Egan, who was the executive officer at that time. Once I became the director of training 7 years ago, one of the first things that they told me that they wanted to see happen was that the department achieve an ISO rating of 1. So a lot of our shortfalls in the past were regarding training. So with the luck that we had obtaining funding for our training center to be reconstructed and renovated, as well as buttressing officer training and training among the rank and file, when we went for our reevaluation for ISO, it made it the that much more easier for us to obtain that ranking. So the training module, the officer training, the training for the rank and file, a robust water supply, the number of companies that we operate and where they're strategically located, as well as how our 911 calls are handled, all played a role in allowing us to obtain the ISO 1 rating, which was, I think, one of the highlights of my career, and certainly Chief Grant's career as well. It was something that we really held as a high standard, kind of a validation of our hard work. Then, fast forward, 6 years from there, I'm still the director of training, and I'm transitioning to a new role as the operations chief. And we saw an opportunity where we would be hiring around 130 firefighters, and having a watershed event of promotions to about 70 people to various ranks within the department. And that allowed us to get everybody as a captive audience and start the buy-in process for the implementation of the incident management system. And recently there was an article in the New Haven Register about it. Made it sound like we were doing something innovative, and we really weren't. The incident command system has been around for about 40 years, but we're a very traditional New England, Northeast fire department. If you go anywhere along the Northeast corridor, and you'll see that a lot of departments through Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and Vermont, any of the urban areas are very similar. They're resistant to change, and the fires go out well. We're a very aggressive fire department. We've been very, very lucky as far as firefighter injuries and deaths. And so we really never had something to drive home the importance of utilizing that system. I was fortunate because I was a charter member of the Connecticut Urban Search and Rescue Task Force, also a rescue specialist with the FEMA task force in Massachusetts for a short while. And those types of teams readily utilize the incident management system because part of the national framework, response framework. So they utilize and work well within that system. So to implement it here was relatively simple once we adopted essentially FireScope with a few modifications, and got some buy-in from the training division, implemented it in training scenarios, and got the senior management of the fire department to start to utilize it on a regular basis. There was kind of this trickle-down effect of how the incidents ran. And again, did a very, very good job of extinguishing fires and responding to incidents. Not a problem. But the way I looked at it was, if we have a catastrophic event, a firefighter down scenario, or an explosion after arrival, or something like that, you need to be able to have people, a redundancy within your command structure, where anybody can step into the role of the incident commander and be able to operate that scene. So that's one of the salient points of utilizing the incident management system. So far, it's been very well received by the personnel. It's really good for us because all of our mutual aid partners are identifying personnel, and PJ is one of those. His department is one of our mutual aid partners. They're all utilizing, position and function on the Fireground as identifying factors, and we went away from the use of radio codes to identifying people by position and function, and decentralizing the command structure on the Fireground, assigning a chief officer, which we upstaffed with the incident management system. We also upstaffed the amount of chief officers on scene, and we divide up the Fireground and decentralize the command structure and decrease the span of control. So so far it's worked really well. I think that it's nothing new, but I think that the New Haven Fire Department is a case study for a traditional fire department who has been historically resistant to change, that if you have the right change agent in place and change team, you can make an effective change to your organization and really accomplish a lot.
And that's what we see, starting with Chief Grant, Chief Egan. That vision was carried forward, and you were able to implement it. It was no small task. And one thing I want you to point out is that no system where there's change goes into effect flawlessly. And if you listen to our radio transmissions before to now, I think PJ could attest, our Fireground sounds a lot better. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's what I was going to jump in here and say. For someone who's grown up as a 13-year-old kid riding their bike to the firehouse, listening to New Haven, because it's the closest city to where I grew up, and then being involved in the fire department, being a mutual aid partner, I've always monitored and always listened to New Haven. So, Chief, all day long you can say how good the department's doing. Frank, all day long you can say how the department's going, but you're looking at it from the inside. I'm listening to it and I'm looking at it from the outside, and there is a huge 360-degree turn in your radio communications and how well your Fireground sounds to be running. You guys know how it's truly running. I don't. I'm on the Fireground with you. But when I sit and I listen to your fires and your calls, there's a clear, distinct difference in the professionalism, the ability to hear how tasks are being assigned, how there's less radio communications. The transmissions are much clearer, much more concise. And I don't care what report you look at, what NIOSH line of duty death report or what near miss report you look at, they all cite poor communications.
Yeah,
we have a problem with communicating.
And we see that there's a lot of talking and across the country. This is a country problem.
Yeah, it's not just
a lot of talking, not a lot of communicating. And that's where I think is the strong suit of this system.
And from listening to your department for almost 30 years now, you are 360 degrees difference from where you were 2 years ago to where you are now. And you could clearly say, yes, you've put into a command system in place and a command structure in your Fireground, but that has, I'm sure, has had rippling effect in the firehouses, but it's absolutely had a positive rippling effect in your communications, which, as one of the #1 line of duty death contributing factors, so you're not just managing your Fireground, you're also keeping the firefighters safer.
Without a doubt. And the other thing I like to say across the country is your radio transmission is really the signature of the chief. The chief can't be there on every call, but your radio transmissions really show where the department is, where the department's going. One thing I wanted to bring up is there was a learning curve, and we're still getting there. There's still, it takes time to implement, drastic change. But one thing that we thought really drove it home is, Chief, when you first instituted the system, during an emergency incident, when you have a company officer not going through their division officer, you didn't hesitate to make a clear, concise transmission to explain to them how the communication change went. And I've never heard that anywhere else in America, listening to radio frequencies, where the incident commander actually set the expectations on scene. And I think that that's what helped us achieve to get where we are right now, is because it brought understanding to everybody on scene and listening to the radio is, oh, wait, this is how I do it. Can you kind of explain how you did that? Because you did it with a certain amount of finesse,
Yeah, well, it's with the proliferation of radios. If I think back to 20 years ago when I got on the job, 22 years ago, the only person that had a radio was the company officer. So the only person that was talking on the radio was the company officer to the battalion chief who was running the job. And so that allowed us, in the event that there was a Mayday situation, there would be communication between the company officer and the battalion chief. Now, since everyone has a radio, I said recently in a television interview that we view the radio as part of the protective ensemble. It's a piece of protective equipment. A lot of folks thought that just because they had a radio, they had to talk on it, and that's not necessarily the case. So when we implemented the incident management system, and our bread and butter fires are 3-deckers, a 2.5-story, 3-story wood frame dwelling. We get a fire in 1 or 2 floors. That's what we're doing here. We put a chief officer on the fire floor and one on the floor above. That's typically the standard operating guideline. So when we first implemented the system, the companies operating on the fire floor or the floor above or the roof team or search and rescue team was wanting to speak to me directly. And since I had assigned a chief officer to each one of those floors as part of the implementation of the system, they would the members still wanted to directly communicate with me. Now, the fire department operates on a scalar system of leadership. So, information should flow upward through the chain of command, and orders flow downward, which is a principle by which we work. So I made sure when we implemented the system that when personnel were trained that they understood that. So the worker bees or the fire companies that are task managing, they needed to talk directly to the battalion chief, because there's a certain degree of accountability that goes with the way Fireground transmissions are made. So at a routine fire, if I have 2 other chief officers operating the scene and I am the incident manager, or a deputy chief is serving as an incident manager and he has another battalion chief operating on the scene, the only person that he should be communicating from are the people that are in charge of a division. The first floor, the second floor, the roof team, search and rescue group, because you still want to maintain that manageable span of control. And like you said, there was a learning curve. So occasionally when the lieutenant or the captain wanted to speak directly to me as the incident commander, or whoever the incident commander was, I had to take that opportunity to be as diplomatic as possible, but it's a recognized hazard, so it needs to be corrected immediately. And using great tact, I would tell them that you're to talk to your division officer, and they'll talk to me. Don't talk directly to the incident commander.
And it was done that quick, but you could see, and we all know, when communications start going bad, it tends to just all pile on. And by, in a sense, hitting the reset button, you could see the whole incident be calmer, and it was easier to follow the flow of the incident. And it also served for the company officers to say, I'm not going to be that guy. I'm not going to be that girl. I'm going to make sure I go through my division officer. Now, one thing that gets missed a lot when you listen to these radio transmissions across the country is people think that every single thing has to be said over the radio. And I think P.J. mentioned it and the chief mentioned it, is that by doing the divisions and having the company officers report to one chief, a lot of that communication was face-to-face. So now you have necessary communication coming across the radio. Can you speak to that? Because not every transmission needs to be retransmit.
Yeah, well, that was a real concern of mine, is that if there was so much chatter, needless talking on the radio. I think back to the Hackensack Ford fire, which was a watershed event for the fire service. And one of the things that was brought up in one of the interviews was there was a lot of talking on the radio and no communication. And what I had feared as the safety officer and the training director, and then as the chief of operations, is that somebody's going to be needing to call a Mayday one day, and the channel is going to be locked up because somebody's asking for tarps on the first floor. And that needs to stop. So we kind of got the folks on the Fireground out of the habit of keying up the mic every chance that they had. And they've done a very good job at that. So what happens now is if anybody operating on a fire floor, if they're in eye shot or earshot of a division officer, they do face-to-face communication. There's no need to talk on the radio anymore. So what it's done is it's really eliminated a lot of the unnecessary chatter that I don't need to know about as the incident commander. We all know the building's on fire. We know that it's going to go out if we put water on it and we ventilate the building. So we don't need a narrative to go along with that. I'll read the smoke. I'll see the water coming out of the window. I'll know the crew is advancing the hose line. If there's a problem, the chief officer in charge of that division will let me know. And that's what I need to know as the incident commander. Again, this is nothing new, but it's something that has been very well received and is working well in our city. So,
Chief, and I want to get to some of those things as a chief officer, as the incident manager, what you want to know. What do you want to hear from your company officers? What do you want to hear from the division chiefs? Before we get to that, I just want to remind our listeners that are sitting here following us, tweet, #FETalk. Any questions you may have, any information that you want us to talk about, maybe some challenges that you're experiencing in your department, your agency. You know, you got some great minds here between Chief Macarelli and Chief Ricci, and we can maybe answer those. And if we can't answer them, maybe we can get some help answering those. So, Chief, when you're operating the Fireground as the incident manager, what are those instances of what you want to hear? There's a whole bunch of stuff that happens to Fireground that we know you don't want to hear, but what do you want to hear? What do you want to know about?
The biggest ones, and this is, basic fire officer stuff: conditions, actions, and needs. What are you seeing? What are you doing about it? And can I be of any assistance or give you any additional resources? Those are the three most important things. In addition to that, I want to know the status of searches, and I want to know if there's any hazards to any other personnel operating the building. A localized collapse, holes in the floor, things of that nature. Those are the big things that I'm going to be looking for. So conditions, actions, and needs, hazards, and status of searches. Those are the biggest things that I'm going to be looking for as the incident manager. I'll be able to see progress. I'll know based upon what I'm seeing from the outside of the building, and again, what I hear from my chief officers that are operating on the fire floor, above the fire floor. I will know from them what else is going on, or if they need any additional resources. So kind of works hand in hand. So it eliminates unnecessary communication or unnecessary chatter, and make sure that that I'm getting the information clearly and concisely from those that are operating in the hazardous environment.
When you talk about declaring searches, something that we worked on in New Haven is when the chief officer, division officer is declaring a search complete over the radio, they do it by geographic location. You'll still listen to radio transmissions across the country where they'll say secondary search is complete. That means you're owning the entire search of that entire structure. So make sure when you're declaring your searches out there, only take responsibility for the area that you are in control over. So if the secondary search is complete on the second floor, you want to say, Division 2 to command, secondary search of the second floor is complete. That way, the chief can build that puzzle outside to ensure that the entire Fireground is covered. You don't want to take responsibility for something that you haven't searched. They call it the John Bonet effect, where they search the two floors of the house, they never searched the basement, and they found the body in the basement. So you want to make sure that you declare your searches. Now, recently we had a fire with a reported people trap on Blatchley Avenue, gasoline siding. The home was going good, and both exposures were, the siding was melting off and going off. You were the incident commander of that. You put a chief officer on the third floor, and then you had another chief officer in the rear, which worked out really well. Can you explain your thought process on that? Because as the incident commander, you have the ability to decentralize the command, put an officer wherever is an area you can't see or you're concerned about. And in that situation, you put officers inside the building, but you also put somebody in the rear of the structure too, to give you information. Explain your thought process to somebody who's out there, because that's a common thing in New Haven to get one house with two houses going. But elsewhere in America, that's only their Main Street problem. They don't go to that every day. So can you kind of give your scope of experience of what you were thinking on that call?
Yeah, well, I'm responding in from home, but I live relatively closely, so I get there pretty soon. We're fortunate that night that we had just promoted another battalion chief. So something that I instituted when I first became the ops chief was when we promoted battalion chiefs. We typically in the past they would be serving in the front seat of an engine company one night, and the next night they'd be riding in a car. In some cases, no experience as an incident commander at all. So we implemented essentially a ride-along program with an experienced battalion chief. So that night on the fire, where we normally have at a working fire one battalion chief and a deputy chief who's the shift commander operating at the fire scene, we had two battalion chiefs and the deputy chief shift commander and myself. So and in addition to that, we had the director of training who serves in a command role, yourself, the drill master, who serves in a command role as well. So we had a lot of bodies to go around. I always use the rule of thumb that when you have multiple dwellings on fire or exposed to fire, you have a one alarm assignment for each building. So with that one, the two exposure buildings were endangered, but they were not involved in fire yet. So we assigned a chief officer to the fire floor and the floor above in the main fire building. and we assigned a chief officer to the rear yard to keep an eye on both the main fire building and serve as my eyes in the rear yard, but also kept an eye on the two exposures, which were well endangered, but not yet involved. But the first arriving companies did an outstanding job protecting exposures, and they had 2.5s on both of those structures right away, which really saved the two adjacent properties from being consumed by fire, because surely they would have. So that was my idea at that particular fire. Wanted to make sure that we had enough companies operating to protect all three buildings if need be, and we were fortunate enough to have all those command officers on scene where they could be divided up and serve in various roles on the Fireground, and it seemed to go very well. That was what I would consider a save.
That was a tremendous save, and we had the opportunity, myself and Battalion Chief Martindetto had opportunity to actually talk to the neighbor whose house was in danger, where the siding was melting off the house, and just accolades to the fire department for saving his house. He couldn't believe the work of our members. So I think that really gives insight of, and I like that, you put first alarm in the fire building, second alarm, third alarm, and sometimes you got to break it up in the beginning to get those 2.5s to cool the exposure system. But that's definitely a save. And speak a little bit about the chief going to the fire floor, because there is a misconception out there, and Dave McGrill talks about it in high-rise fires, where you put the chief on the fire floor, the floor above, and they automatically think that chief has to be on air on the floor above the entire time, where in a high-rise thing they're actually going to be going back and forth. Can you explain a little bit about the mobility of the chief that's assigned to the fire floor? Like, it's not uncommon for that chief to come down the stairs and stick his head out the window, or her head out the window, to talk to command and then go back. They're not 100% of the time right there, but they're within that hazard area. Can you explain that a little bit? Because some people have a misconception of that.
Yeah, well, what we've done is, once I arrive on the scene, there should already be two chiefs there, the shift commander and one of the battalion chiefs. So what's been done is the deputy chief, who's in charge of the overall scene until I get there, they're assigning the battalion chief to the fire floor. Although we've flipped that a little bit here and there, because some of the less experienced battalion chiefs, the deputy chiefs, are allowing them to run the incident, and they're going to the inside. And it's really a rankless structure, so it doesn't matter. But what the whole point of the chief officer going inside and serving as a division officer, regardless of where they are, is to allow me to get a report on conditions, actions, and needs, so that the firefighting companies, the search and rescue companies, and any of the truck companies that are operating on the interior can focus on their task rather than have to worry about communicating with me. As a company officer, I always remember a battalion chief on the radio consistently asking me, how you making out? How you making out? On the radio. And in the meantime, myself and my pipe man are trying to stretch a line up a 3-story dwelling into the attic, and I don't really have time to talk on the radio. So the battalion chief that's operating as the division officer sees what's going on. They know that progress is being made. In most cases, they're equipped with a thermal imager. I don't need to consistently harass the company officer to find out what their progress is. So that's the role that they play. They have a fluid role there too. They can, if we only have one available to us, they can meander between the fire floor and the floor above to give me an idea of conditions, and it seems to be working really well.
Can you explain to our viewers how you utilize your safety officers in this system?
Well, what we did is we added about, I think in early 2015, we added safety officers to every working fire. So particularly during the day when we have a really robust training staff, we're very fortunate in that respect. at a working fire, we're going to get multiple personnel from the training division to respond to the scene to serve as safety officers. And I view their role as very important on the Fireground to serve as a safety aspect. So what we've been doing as a practice is assigning safety officers to work with each incident commander now, with each division officer. And their job is to look out for things that impact safety. So they're an extra pair of eyes for the incident manager or the division officer to look out for things that may impact the safety and well-being of the firefighters. Now, as the incident commander, I reserve the right to assign them as a division. And I have no problem doing that. I've done it in the past. I believe I did it with you on Downing Street fire recently. And I'll assign them as a division officer. Everybody is familiar with how the system operates to operate at the incident. And again, it's a rankless structure, so anybody should be able to work within it and deploy it. So I'll utilize them in any way that I see fit as an incident commander in charge of the incident, barring having them start to break apart companies and work with individuals where it impacts the accountability on the Fireground.
Correct. And I think it's important for the safety officers to know that you're not there as the radio ranger. When I do serve as a safety officer, I view my role as to try to cover some blind spots, maybe pick up on something that they're not seeing, and you won't hear me on the radio. I'll go right up to the division chief and have a conversation with them, and a lot of things can be done without being on the radio. Perfect example, Downing Street, the 2.5 wood, the half story, the windows on that third floor were level with the actual floor. So in a smoke environment, you could literally crawl right out the window. So there was no radio communications. We simply ripped down a door, Antonio Moldovar and I, and we just covered the bottom of the windows together. There was no need for any radio communications. We secured and engineered a way to control the hazard. And I think that's important because sometimes safety officers try to overstep their bounds. Yes, you have the power of the radio to stop something from happening, but you're there to work within the system, to be an arm or the eyes of the incident commander. And if you're assigned to a division officer, you're there to work with that division officer, not to take over for him. And that's what helps build the entire system. And I like what we're seeing on the Fireground, where sometimes the deputy chief or acting deputy chief will allow the battalion chief to stand outside, and the deputy will go in, because it does build your personnel, because we are all replaceable, and that's the goal, to leave the system better than when you found it. And I think that you need to be commended for that, because I think that's what's really helping us progress as a fire department. And you know, it started with our previous chiefs, but you were the one who was able to institute it and drive it home. And it is an incredibly difficult thing in New England to fix an issue like this. And I think a lot of departments could learn from the New Haven case study, and we're still working our way through it, but I see us really moving in the right direction of incident command. From your perspective, what
you know, in my role, I'm training and safety. So on the Fireground, I'm the safety officer, and that's been a very challenge for our department for me, because previous safety officers, they took that I'm going to stand outside by the command post and I'm going to look at the safety from this perspective. And that individual never performed an operations role, was never assigned any divisions, was never put into the operations of the incident. Well, coming into the job, it says, well, you know what? We have a lot of eyes on the outside of the building. We're a combination department. We get a lot of volunteer officers who might not go in. We get a lot of volunteers. So we cross-train. I sent 15 firefighters from career staff and volunteer staff to incident safety officers for the Kinetic Fire Academy. So we put more eyes of the safety officers on scene. And now I have become more of an operations role, or an interior safety position. So I'm going in, I'm operating, I'm taking a division where I'm looking at the hazards from the inside out, not necessarily outside in. We don't have the staff officers, the chief officers, like your city does. And we run with a battalion chief. It's the only officer running the shift, from 10 firefighters and a battalion chief. So he or she is the only officer. Then we'll get the chief or the assistant chief. They're coming in as a command role. Then you're going to have me come in and be another command role. We have too many bosses and not enough, firefighters to run the incident. So it's worked out well for me, because I still like to fight fires and I still like to be in an operations arm. But that is a challenge. Where in our department, some of the thought process was, well, you're the safety officer. You need to be standing outside of the command post watching the incident. While that's an important piece, an important puzzle, you're not seeing the entire incident. You're seeing one dimension of that incident. Maybe you'll do your 360, you'll see the four sides, but you're not looking at some of the other stuff. Without company officers, lieutenants, or captains, we really didn't have any good communication coming back of the holes in the floors, of the windows that are level with the, with the floor. So that's the role that I've taken in my department, and it definitely took a while to get used to. But over the 7, approaching 8 years now I've been in this role, myself and the battalion chiefs, where the incident commanders, have really built a good tactical relationship where they know what I'm doing, where I'm going, and I become an arm or an extension of what they're doing. I don't interfere in the operations unless they assign me a specific operational piece, but yet I'm there as their eyes, their ears, and assisting them as an operations or as an arm within the division.
Yeah, I think that is a mistake that happens throughout the country, is just having the safety officer stand outside. And under Chief Macarelli's leadership, putting that safety officer inside with the division chief, we've seen it time and time again where it really has a positive impact. On Gulf Street fire, we had a firefighter fall through the floor, but his air pack got hung up and he was able to pull himself out. Louis Oliva, one of our assistant drill masters, who's a lieutenant, after they got him out, put a door over it and then announced there's a door over the hole. So, it does work, and it gives a fresh perspective of somebody who's not so involved in what's going on that they're losing that perspective. The incident command system has safety built in, exactly what Tincata Fabrics does for firefighters' PPE. So once again, we want to thank Tincata Fabrics for all they do for firefighters across the country. Another thing that New Haven did, and Battalion Chief Billy Gould was one who brought it to our attention. I think he got it from another department. There's not a lot of original ideas out there, but we're all borrowing brilliance, as Thomas Edison used to say, try to make our department better. And I see it as making a real positive impact. And that was the red tape in helping command the fire. We all know we put up yellow tape if you have a down wire or a collapse zone. Firefighters are, like a moth to the flame. They want to keep encroaching in, or they just go right under Dixville Avenue by a wire hanging down. It was right on the Hamden line. It was hanging down at eye level, and this was before the red tape, and they put up yellow tape, but they didn't assign anybody, this was years ago, to monitor that zone. They didn't assign a safety officer. Is that your job is to stand here and keep everybody away from this area, which is a vital role. It may not be the most popular role when you assign it to somebody, but having a safety officer assigned to a known hazard area besides the tape is a vital role. Somebody's got to do it. And I saw an officer from the other department come by talking to somebody, hit him right in the head with the helmet. He shooed it away with his hand and kept walking under the yellow tape. So can you explain how we instituted the red tape and how you used it as the incident commander? Because I know you've given me orders probably at least 3 or 4 times, to set up their red tape. And it's not the most glamorous thing to do on the Fireground, but you got to do it with pride because it's about the bigger picture.
I think, what came into play with the red tape is we become immune to certain things that we see on the Fireground. So the yellow tape, the firefighters think that doesn't apply to me. I'm on this side of the yellow tape. So the red tape really didn't come from us. Hartford Fire Department's had a standard operating guideline on that for some time. We essentially adopted that, but we do a lot of rescue work, and I know that a lot of us in rescue, we paint our carabiner threads red. And the saying is, if you see red, you're dead. And basically, that's what it is. It's something different, so it gets you out of that norm, that tunnel visioning, because you're seeing red. So until they become immune to red, and we have to move on to chartreuse or some other color, the red seems to be working. We know it's a hazard to firefighters. So whether it's a collapse zone or if it's a down power line or a sinkhole or something like that, we'll be surrounding that with red tape, and that seems to be working well. We've done a lot of things in the past year, moving from a ride list to a tag system, and that's another example of stuff that we've implemented in the past 2 years. We went from a standard ride list, which has its inherent flaws, to a tag system, which allows us to maintain accountability a lot better. Again, something that was discussed among the command staff, and implemented in the past year for the same reason. Everybody has a tag. We know who's there. And there's redundancy built into that system as opposed to the ride list, which had no redundancy. So if something happens on the Fireground and the original tags are destroyed, we can go to another place and find a redundant tag system to identify where people were operating and so forth. So all kind of ties into the same thing.
Yeah, the accountability system has worked out really well because the paper system had every day at shift change was a problem with people coming on and off before the paper system was updated. So the tags basically cover that whole scenario. You know who's on the Fireground, and then you can still use the paper system. Something I like to do is grabbing that paper system out of the chief's car to track where the companies are to assist you when you're working your command board. And that was a hole in our previous system. I remember asking a chief on scene one day, what companies do you have here and where they're operating? And I was the RIT officer on Engine 10, and he kind of looked at me like I had 3 heads. So I was like, no, I'll start tracking where everybody is. So it's important to be able to track who's actually on scene. And one thing that I want to bring up that seems to be a problem is that if a pass alarm goes off, it needs to be investigated. So just like the tag system, there's some discipline on the Fireground for ensuring the company officers set the expectations that you tag in and you tag off your piece, because it's only as good as the buy-in you get from the memberships. And then when they're brought to the command board, that again, we make sure that people are tagging in and out so they're counted on the Fireground. But also, if you hear a pass alarm on the Fireground, you've got to make sure that that's investigated, because if a member goes behind the piece and has a heart attack and everybody becomes immune to it, that's an issue. On the rehab thing, something that Chief Macarelli does is he's always in his turnout gear, it seems. So 90% of the time, whenever I see you on the Fireground running in command of the fire, you have your turnout gear on. And you explain why you do that to the members on the Downing Street fire, which, kind of brought a new level of understanding. Plus, being inside the fire line tape can always be dangerous, as we just saw in New York City. But do you remember what you told the guys operating at Downing Street, why you make sure that you always try to put on your gear?
Well, I do it for a number of reasons. One is I want to lead by example. We've had a problem in the past with, the salty guys not wanting to wear their turnout gear. It's a certain machismo that goes along with that, but it's because, and I believe that what you're referring to is I've utilized that as myself as a barometer. So if I'm outside and I'm not really doing anything and I'm becoming overheated or whatever, then I have to recognize that those that are exerting themselves in a superheated environment while stretching a hose line, wearing a breathing apparatus, that they're going to need to be rehabbed. So that's why I go out of my way to make sure I wear my turnout gear, knowing full well that probably under most circumstances can get away with not wearing it. But that's primarily the reason that I do it. It's to serve as a barometer for those that are doing the real work on the Fireground and making sure that I rehab them appropriately. Now, I'm going to say all this is echo what I said earlier. Is I have never had an original idea, so I want to thank all the chiefs out there that come up with this great stuff that we can adopt here. So that's one.
And another thing that you put into place was sending a rehab company to our fires. It's something that we never had. Everybody used to be lying in the street, and now we have a rehab company responding to every working fire. Can you explain how you put that into effect? Because it seems there's still so many departments that aren't implementing these things. They just think it's too hard, or it seems easy when it's done. But if you don't have this stuff in place, I know there's viewers and listeners out there listening to this saying, I need to get this done in my department. How'd you get the rehab concept put into effect?
Well, it was a lot of moving parts to it, but we had an old ambulance, a big rescue type ambulance that was outliving its usefulness as a paramedic truck. So we had an opportunity to repurpose that. So we sunk a little money into it, about $3,000, put an awning on it. We installed 2 RV fridges that work off the inverter on the rig, stays plugged in the station. So It's got a misting fan on it. It's got chairs, and there's benches in the back. So the firefighters that are rehabbing in a when it's really hot outside can go and sit in the back and cool off. It was kind of something that we needed to do because years ago, like a lot of the urban fire departments, we had a very active fire buff organization, and they operated a canteen. But as more firefighters and folks started to flee the cities for the suburbs, it became more and more difficult to staff that unit. So they didn't get out to as many fires as we would have liked them to. They used to be called the Box 22 Association because they would respond on all 22s, which was our code for second alarms. We run a rehab now on all working fires. So as soon as the working fire is transmitted, the communication center tones out the second due company on the third alarm to respond to headquarters where the rehab unit is stored, and they respond with it to the scene. Now, once they're there, they can either be tasked with simply dropping it off or staffing the unit or being placed to work on the Fireground as an extra company. We did it that way for a couple of different reasons. They're on a box card, so it takes any thinking out of the communication center because there's a little bit of loss of street smarts in the current PSAPs. So they have to send the third alarm company. Now, the chief in charge of the scene can assign any company he wants and usurp that. But this makes sure that somebody is going to come and get it. If they want to alter it, that's fine. And they bring it to the scene, drop it off as close to the fire scene as possible, and then we begin to rehab companies. But what was nice about this is a very good example of union buy-in. We didn't have a lot of startup money for it because our budget is so X amount of dollars. And what we did is we asked that every coffee fund in every station donate a case of water, a case of energy drink, and a box of some type of energy bars, which are outfitted on the rig. And within the first year, in the next budget season, we made sure that we had enough money allotted to outfit that. So the firefighters weren't responsible for bearing the burden of that. So now it's stocked by the department, and it's working really well.
Can you speak a little bit about the command board and the importance of having somebody manage the command board, track the companies to be an aid to the incident commander?
Yeah, I mean the command board, again, it's nothing new. It's a tool to the for the incident manager to keep track of companies on the Fireground, so they know who's assigned to what task and what their geographic location is on the Fireground. Can I, as a chief officer in a routine, 3-story wood frame dwelling, have a very good idea of exactly where all my companies are? Absolutely. Okay. But it's when I'm struck down at the scene and somebody needs to come in and pick up where I left off. So it allows somebody to step in and take over for me should something happen to me and know exactly where everybody is without me having to brief them. And that's an important part of the whole system. A lot of our business, we talk about redundant command structure, and we also talk about a plan of succession. That's a very important part of a plan of succession. Not just who's going to run the department, okay, so should I leave or retire or whatever, but it's who's going to run the incident should something unfortunate happen to me, and hopefully it doesn't for a long time. But that's exactly why you need that board. Not necessarily for what's going on right now, but it's for what could happen. Okay, we have a lost or trapped firefighter on the scene. Maybe he became separated from his crew. We know exactly by looking at that board, cross-reference it to our accountability system, where the firefighter was last operating on the scene. So it plays a vital role in management on the scene. I don't expect everybody to walk around with a clipboard on the Fireground, but it's important that when we're operating on the scene, we utilize that command board and assign somebody to make sure that they keep track of where personnel are operating on the Fireground.
And the other piece that it does is, you mentioned earlier, Frank, when you were an engine officer and you were a grid officer, you came up to the deputy chief and says, who do you have operating the scene and where are they? and he looked at you like you had 5 heads, right? He may have knew exactly where they were, but in that minute, he had another thought. You now, as a RIT officer, the RIT officer of your department, can walk up, look at the command board, know exactly who's operating where, and not have to bother the incident commander. So not necessarily just somebody stepping up if something happens where you couldn't continue the operations. It also keeps everybody else informed, and it helps that RIT company when they can come up and format their plan to tell their crew where and what's going on in the scene, which I think is another crucial piece.
The RIT company can also start tracking crews. Besides your responsibility on the RIT company to soften the building, put up ladders, do your 360, evaluate changing conditions, but you should also be listening to the radio, because if a Mayday situation goes on, you may not get all the information you need in that Mayday, but you may have picked up on the command board or picked up on a radio transmission of where those people were operating. Can you speak a little bit about how you utilize your RIT team? Because there's still departments out there, FDIC, I hear it every time. Our RIT team just stands outside, or our RIT team is of 2 people. You can't have a 2-person RIT team. It's impossible to carry a down firefighter with 2 people. So we know you need a full company, but explain to our viewers on how you utilize the RIT team when they come in to soften the building, ladder the building, the importance of what they do for you.
Yeah, I mean, the RIT team, they play a vital role on the Fireground. It's not really one of the more glorious things that you could be assigned, especially if you're an aggressive officer with an aggressive crew, but they play a very important role should they be needed to operate on the Fireground. Now, you mentioned softening the building or placing ladders. Those are all things that, as the incident commander, I ensure that the RIT company is doing. So they'll set up, we have prearranged RIT tarps and RIT equipment that they'll bring with them, that they'll grab off one of the closest ladder trucks at the scene. And then I immediately have them start putting ladders up to wherever crews are operating on the upper floors of the building. And then one thing that I make sure that they do is check the perimeter of a building to make sure that if anybody has jumped out of a window, is not laying behind the bushes or shrubs around the house. But they're also there to scan the building with thermal imagers on the outside, and they also will be operating the pack tracker to assist me in accountability. So I try to leave them outside the building whenever possible, because if I need them to be outside and be in earshot of me,
Have full tank of air so
they can go to operate on in the event that they're needed to go to work. And I will rotate them out. So if the situation escalates and I call a second alarm or a third alarm, I'll put the RIT company to work, knowing that I have another company that's going to come in and fill their place. But our standard operating guidelines dictate that our RIT companies have to be a minimum of 4 people. So our paramedic units typically have 2. I'll put them to work in another role, and I utilize the 4-person RIT company. So that was another improvement that we made some years ago, where we went from a 2-person RIT company to a 4-person or 5-person RIT company, depending on the situation.
And it's something that I've seen is that because of utilizing the RIT team to throw ladders, our companies in the training academy, we know New Haven does ladders right, and we really bang it in. But now with having the RIT team who may not come from a house with a ladder company, so because those guys are now grabbing 35s and they're putting up ladders, the proficiency department-wide has increased with throwing ladders. Instead of just having the double houses with a truck be solid 5 years out of the academy and throwing ladders, I see single house companies now being proficient to get ladders up on the Fireground. And I think that's an important skill.
Yeah, it's great. I think one line that really hit me, we used it at FDIC a couple years ago and talked about this exact subject. It says, you have a loved one who passes away, you wouldn't ask 2 of your family members to try to carry the casket. How many would you ask for?
Yeah, that's an ideal condition.
Ideal conditions. You're not going to have 2 carry a casket. You wouldn't expect 2 firefighters to carry 1 down firefighter out of the building. So we need to make sure we staff that position, staff that room with enough personnel.
What's kind of funny is when I ask that question at FDIC, I pose it as a trap. I always say, if you got put in charge of a funeral for the widow, and the widow came to you and said, I'd like only 2 of my husband's best friends who are on the job to carry the casket, what would you say? I've yet to find anybody in the country say, well, I would sit down, I'd be very sensitive, I have people say, I'd put my hand on their shoulder, and I would explain there's no way that two people could carry the casket. We got to transfer stairs. We got to do, I said, but yet you lack the courage on the Fireground to call for another fire company to come, because everybody wants to come to your fire, regardless whether you're in East Oshkosh or whether you're in the city department. Everybody wants to come to the fire. Invite them, train with them to the Fireground. So I think that
it's great, and it traps them well. It speaks volumes to what we really should be doing as far as staffing our rig team. We're approaching that 1 hour mark, but there's something I want to bring up, and I want to bring, the chief mentioned it early on in the show and kind of dove into it a little bit a few minutes ago, and I know it's one of those things that you and I have worked on through fire engineering, through Penwell, and that's with our communication center. I know, Chief, back many years ago, you did some work with training and educating dispatchers across the country as well. Frank, we saw a weakness in the country in the dispatcher training and the dispatcher education. Chief, you can very easily be operating in a Fireground, and one of your companies, one of your members may transmit that Mayday, and their one and only opportunity to call for help, you may miss it, not because you're doing something wrong, but because the inherent Fireground, the way things work with all the background noise and the engines and your communications and all the things you're doing as chief officer. And we felt it really important that we begin looking at our communication center and train them to know what to do in a Mayday situation. So if you hear the Mayday, Chief, what your communication center should do: sit back, not intervene, take some notes, start gathering all the information. So if you need anything, they can go back and give you that information, or they can reverse the tape and listen. But then in the case where if the incident commander misses the Mayday, what should that incident commander do? Back also a few minutes ago, you mentioned Hackensack Ford. That was one of the problems there. The incident commanders missed the Mayday, and a detective from the police bureau called and contacted the dispatcher and said, hey, you got guys calling for help here. That's a problem, right? So we designed and we authored this training DVD through Penwell Fire Engineering for Mayday for the fire dispatcher. So maybe, and I know that fire department and the communications and training dispatcher is an inherent problem across the country for all of us. But if you were to have a clean slate, if you were to have somebody come say you can do anything you want with your communicators, anything you want with your dispatch, you have 2 hours. What kind of information as a commander, as a leader of this organization, or any chief of any organization, would you do for your communication center to help train them to be better prepared to augment your position in the fire grounds?
I think that what I would, and I've used to train dispatchers, is to train them to always maintain situational awareness. And it's important that they know key phrases that are used on the fire ground, like Mayday and urgent, and what their role would be if one of those is called. We had an event right here in New Haven where a Mayday wasn't quite a Mayday. We had a firefighter that was trapped and disoriented, calling for help on the radio. Nobody on the fire ground heard it, and it was the keen ear of a dispatcher that picked up that this firefighter was lost in the building, and ultimately led to a successful rescue. So I think the most important thing is for them to have a situational awareness, that they need to understand that they may not play an active role in the incident. That's why we have an incident commander. But they need to make sure that they're paying attention to what's going on, right? And what to do. They need to make sure that if they're hearing something that they're not sure sounds right, that they need to immediately contact the incident commander.
And, and if you go back and look at the double line of duty depth in Boston, I believe it was 2 years ago, the fire dispatcher there, phenomenal job at assisting the incident commander with the Mayday and the lost firefighters in that brownstone. If you go back to 2 weeks ago, FDNY had that gas explosion where they transmitted 1060, major emergency. If you listen to the audio from that incident, the fire dispatcher did a phenomenal job in augmenting the incident management team and helping them with the incident. I have yet to listen to the audio from FDNY yesterday in the line of duty death. What you mentioned it before the show on how well the incident was run and commanded. I'm sure that the fire dispatcher played a key role in getting additional companies, and that was a 1060 major emergency in FDNY also. So the fire dispatcher has a critical role, but they need to know their role. They need to understand their role. And I think that situational awareness is really key. So I appreciate that point.
I'd like to thank Tincata Fabrics for sponsoring today's show. And I'd really like to thank Chief Macarelli. He's a true leader. I've been here through a lot of chiefs. I've worked really well with Chief Grant, Chief Egan, but for the union and labor management, Chief Macarelli has definitely taken it to a new level. We've reduced grievances. We don't always agree, and that's okay between labor and management, but we always talk. We always sit down, we get together one day a week for coffee, and we work through problems, and we keep our issues out of the paper, and that's something that should be proud of, and it shows that both labor and management can work together for the betterment of the department. So I really appreciate what you do as chief. I appreciate what you do as chief of operations, and yes, you're humble that a lot of people played a role in getting us into the command, starting with Chief Grant and working way up. And the training division, as a member of the training division, we have a great staff at the training division that helps get these things implemented. But the fact is, you were the tip of the spear, the catalyst to get all the players together to get it done. So I congratulate you. And for today's Google Hangout, I'd like to thank again Tincata Fabric, and I'd also like you to go to the website and check out Honeywell. There's a free scholarship to FDIC for departments out there. This Google Hangout is also going to be posted for this month's Politics and Tactics radio show for fire engineering. We're going to use the audio and put this up there. So we'd like to thank our sponsor for the radio show, Honeywell, and they have a sponsorship. So if you know somebody, and we all know somebody who wants to go to FDIC, it's a full ride scholarship. So we thank Honeywell and Tincata Fabrics for all they do. And that's it for today's Google Hangout. Thanks to Chief Norwood, and thanks to Chief Macarelli.
Thanks for having me.
Have a good day, sir.
Thanks, Frank. Thank you. Chief, thank you. Thank you.